Absolut. Das transatlantische Bündnis ist gewachsen.
Absolutely. The transatlantic alliance has grown over decades. The American presence in Europe is strong and determined. We have closely coordinated the planning to secure the Near and Middle East in a phase after the war against Iran. In this respect, I cannot see in any way that this relationship is not working.
That was Stefan Cornelius, spokesperson of the German government, speaking to journalists in Berlin on Monday after US President Donald Trump's snap decision to pull 5,000 troops out of Germany. The withdrawal was announced last Friday after German Chancellor Friedrich Merz criticized Washington's war in Iran. NATO officials were not warned about the decision before its announcement, a move that once again, and despite Cornelius's reassurances, sparked debate over US-EU relationships, the NATO alliance, and the EU's foreign policy. Welcome to Brussels, My Love, the podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Walker. On the eve of Europe Day, we assess Europe's place in the international arena. What is the state of the transatlantic alliance? Can Europe play a role in the Middle East? Are international partnerships strengthening or weakening Brussels' position in the global balance of power? And are these geopolitical issues dividing or uniting the bloc? And before leaving, we'll look at the 70th edition of the Eurovision Song Contest, taking place next week in Vienna. With 5 European countries boycotting the event, is the singing competition losing its influence? But first, let's look at the hard politics. Sitting at the table with me are Tomi Hutanen, who is the Executive Director of the Wilfried Martens Centre for European Studies. Welcome, thank you for joining us. And Shona Murray, Euronews' Senior Correspondent. Thank you, Shona, it's great to have you here. So geopolitically, Europe is facing this critical juncture. Shona, I want to start with this rift within NATO. Trump has accused allies of not paying their dues. There are these leaked emails suggesting that maybe they could chuck out Spain. More recently, they've announced that a significant troop withdrawal could be seen in Germany. Have European allies formed a common front in response to this messaging from the White House? Do you think Donald Trump is helping to unify Europe on this front?
I think he has eventually. It took a while. I mean, he has accused them of not paying their way, but they have agreed to meet the 5% spending target over 10 years, which is a huge amount coming from 2%. In addition to that, they've bent over backwards for Donald Trump. They've accepted the 15% tariffs. They've accepted even his harsh criticisms and diatribe against people like President Zelensky in the Oval Office. But I think it really came to a bit of an end back in January when Donald Trump threatened the territory of Denmark and said he would take over Greenland. So I think European allies saw that moment, and also the fact that he rolled out the red carpet for Vladimir Putin, and then in recent weeks even removed very important oil sanctions on Russian oil, which was a key part of Western response to the war in Ukraine. He removed those oil sanctions in relation to the Strait of Hormuz. So Europeans now agree that they need to have a European pillar within inside NATO, and that they have to move much faster independently away from the United States security architecture. How they do that is another question, because they're so intertwined, but they will be doing that.
Tomi, Shona there touched on Russia. The EU has been divided in recent years, both when it comes to sanctioning Moscow and supporting Ukraine. Now, this division was really specifically driven by Hungary and also Belarus. Now, Viktor Orban is out of power. Do you expect that the bloc will speak with one voice on these matters now?
Actually, I would say that Europe has been united on Russia. We have had, as you mentioned, the issue with Hungary, and now that issue is away. I think Tusk already commented, the Prime Minister of Poland, how the atmospherics are different than before. But of course, the main challenge, which is related to Russia, is the war in Ukraine. I think the war is much more balanced. Ukraine is pushing back, but it's also suffering. What we are seeing that Russia is becoming more and more desperate, and that is now, as they are not able to gain in the front, they are attacking more and more the civil population in Ukraine. But to conclude, Europe's support is key. Increasingly, we took over the US part, and it's challenging, but it's stable.
And now looking a bit further afield, China, more specifically trade with Beijing, is another contentious foreign policy issue, especially in recent weeks. Member states are split between protecting domestic industries on the one hand, preserving economic ties with China on the other. Will these recent threats that we've seen from China over plans to strengthen competitiveness in the EU, will it make the EU be more aligned? And can the EU afford another trade war in the current environment?
I certainly can't afford another trade war. I think the relations with China have slowed down immensely for lots of reasons, but mainly because of the war in Ukraine, because China is a chief enabler of Russia's war in Ukraine. In fact, the EU consistently says that if China wanted to end the war in Ukraine, it could actually do it single-handedly because it's the number one purchaser of Russian crude oil. In addition to that, you've seen China reject the Industrial Accelerator Act and other pieces of legislation that the EU has tried to have to make the single market more competitive and also to make it more prosperous. So it's very difficult for the EU and China to have a trusting, fair relationship.
Because it seemed like the EU was on the path towards that. No, we saw that there was these movements of reconciliation, but now it seems like there's some backtracking again.
I think there's three basic reasons why China is pushing. First of all, the economic pressures. The domestic consumption is not increasing in China, so they have to find it somewhere else. Secondly, big export market US is pushing back. We know all the trade conflict which is there, and as a result, the Europe is the way. But the fact is also that for Europe to say that there's a dilemma. Either we suffer now by resisting China and paying the economic price, or we suffer much more in upcoming years. But in upcoming years, if we continue like that, de facto supporting China's sovereignty will end up very challenging for us.
And staying on this issue of trade, another issue keeping Brussels up at night is obviously the EU's deal with the US. The matter has gained urgency now because Trump made these renewed threats against European car industry, saying the EU is not holding its side of the agreement. Shona, will the EU now rush to ratify the deal, even though discussions are still ongoing within the institutions? Is this the moment to take a stand against the US?
I think there's so much at stake. And what does that stand look like and what does it achieve? Because I think that the decision by the EU, at least President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, is one of appeasement because she wants to ensure that Donald Trump stays on side when it comes to Ukraine and general European security. And that is above everything else. So that's why she was so eager to accept the 15% tariff rate at Turnberry. The thing is, what Donald Trump has promised hasn't necessarily materialized because he hasn't really done anything when it comes to negotiating an end to the war in Ukraine. Like I said earlier, he pulled out the red carpet for Vladimir Putin. He's then attacked his NATO allies, calling them NATO a paper tiger. I don't think that the EU is rushing to pass this deal. Just on Wednesday night, earlier in the week, they weren't able to get agreement between the Council, the Commission and the Parliament. So they'll meet again on the May 19th. We don't know if it'll pass then. There is definitely a stalemate there. But at the same time, what do we learn from this? Well, Donald Trump is willing at the middle of the night while we're all asleep to throw out a Truth Social post threatening European industry, in this case the car industry, with extra tariffs, meaning that his word is not his bond.
And in this turmoil, the EU has started looking for other partners, India, Japan, the Mercosur countries. Do you think that this is now the new EU's commercial strategy to look for more reliable partners?
Absolutely. I think we see it also here in Brussels bubble. We need to see, new trade deal, Mercosur, India, and there's a kind of new ecosystem being creating. But about what you said about strategy, I think, first of all, I think time is now in EU's side in certain sense, because we see that due to the Iran war, you look at the domestic debate in the United States, and also the economic reality going to midterms creates a situation where I think the current administration starts to run out of steam. To conclude, I think the strategy is a little bit like Mark Rubio in Hormuz Strait, saying that, okay, we move our way and it's the defensive action. If they shoot us, we shoot back. And I think this whole sunset clause attitude of European Union is actually a good one. So we don't want conflict, but if you come to us and push our threshold, we push back. And I think it's a good...
Do we push back? That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we remains to be seen.
We say we're going to push back.
Yes, exactly.
And we have the big bazooka, but we don't.
Yeah, exactly. So that's actually the short-term gain versus strategic loss. I think that's the issue here. Because if we now give in, there's a big bill to come in upcoming years.
And just lastly, one question that I want to ask to both of you. We've talked about all these issues facing the EU. Is the EU ultimately more aligned than it has been in the past in the face of these problems? If not, what is needed for the EU to become more aligned, to speak with one voice on these foreign matters?
Well, I mean, I think the departure of Viktor Orban is a big help. It's a small country, Hungary, not very consequential when it comes to the EU budget in any way, but actually was so debilitating when it came to progress on very important matters of foreign
Because of
policy.
the unanimity vote.
Because of unanimity, because every member state, when it comes to very serious matters, has to have a vote at the table, and Orban often blocked things. But actually, it was much more graver than that, because we saw towards the end that he was actually on the phone to people like Vladimir Putin, offering his assistance at the table at the European Union. So he was essentially a Trojan horse for Putin, the biggest enemy of the whole continent. So that does help. The other issue is that people are saying maybe we should get rid of the unanimity clause, where you have a qualified majority, perhaps, so that 65% of the EU population that would pass a vote. But then smaller countries, their voices aren't heard, because it means that in any qualified majority vote, it's either Germany or Italy have to pass something for it to pass, or to support something for it to pass. And the whole essence of the European Union is the democratic system. So I don't know if that's going to go down well in smaller countries, but there has to be some sort of a solution, because the EU has been quite impotent over the past few years.
I would conclude saying that if you look last 20 years here in Brussels, the progress of the European Union was pushed by so-called great ideas. But now what we see last year from the Brexit, when it was apparent for everyone, or the member states, that going out from the EU and looking what happened to UK, the economy and all these issues, is not such a great idea. So what we see now, what is the driver really? It's these challenges. There's a realization in Germany, in France, in all the countries, that even if we are together, ideally as a union, really as a country, we would be number 3 globally. What is driving is, challenges. We had the COVID, we have the security issues. It is not about actually a matter of choice, it's a matter of need.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think it's a very good point around Brexit as well. I think because actually we saw it with the far right. Often many of them, the likes of Marine Le Pen and others, AfD in Germany, they all talked about leaving the European Union. Now they want to stay in the EU because they saw how disastrous it was for the UK, for the UK's economy in particular. The only issue for, I suppose, Europhiles is that they want to stay in the EU and create it in their own mode and model. That's problematic.
Thank you so much to you both for these really interesting insights.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is clear that foreign policy remains a source of friction among EU member states. A case in point is their position when it comes to Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and Lebanon. This political division is not only present in institutional settings here in Brussels, but has also spilled over, impacting cultural events such as the international television music competition Eurovision, starting next Tuesday. This year, several countries are boycotting the show in protest of Israel's participation. To understand how this will affect the event, my colleague Alice Carnavali sat down with Dean Vuletic, historian and author of the book Post-War Europe and the Eurovision Song Contest.
Hi Dean, welcome on Brussels My Love, the podcast.
Hello, Alice, thank you for having me.
We're days away from the start of the 17th edition of the Eurovision Song Contest. The first semi-final will take place on Tuesday, the 12th of May, the second one on Thursday, the 14th of May, and then the final will be on Saturday, the 16th of May in Vienna, Austria. How do you feel? Will you attend the show?
Yes, I have tickets for all of the live shows. So for the 2 semifinals and the grand final, I'm very excited. I've been attending Eurovision Live for many years now.
This is a special edition of the Eurovision Song Contest. Spain, one of the big 5, so one of the countries which automatically qualify for the final, will not participate in the competition. And Spain, it's not alone. Iceland, Ireland, Slovenia, and the Netherlands will also be absent from the competition. They decided to withdraw following the decision of the European Broadcasting Union to allow Israel to compete, citing concerns of Israel's actions in Gaza. Has Eurovision ever seen a similar way of boycotts, and if yes, when and why?
This is unique because it is the biggest boycott of Eurovision ever for political reasons. But the history of boycotts in Eurovision actually goes back to 1969, when, rather ironically, it was the Austrian national broadcaster ORF, which boycotted Eurovision for the first time for a political reason. And that's because Eurovision was then staged in Madrid under the dictatorship of Francisco Franco. Now, we've seen other boycotts because of the quality of the contest, because of voting in the contest, different reasons. But when it comes to politics, there have been boycotts that have mainly concerned tensions between Greece and Turkey in the 1970s, and later on, tensions between Russia and Georgia and Russia and Ukraine. But these have usually been bilateral boycotts. This is really the first example where we see a multilateral boycott.
And why isn't the EBU, so the European Broadcasting Union, banning Israel as it did with Russia in 2022 for the full-scale invasion of Ukraine?
The cases of Russia and Israel are very different because there are no European sanctions against Israel as there were against Russia. So we have to remember that the European Broadcasting Union is not a political organization, but the European Broadcasting Union is a technical association. It's there to facilitate cooperation among national public service broadcasters. So it's a non-political organization, and Eurovision is also intended to be a non-political event, even though we know that it has always reflected political changes in Europe. But nonetheless, the agenda behind it is not political. So the European Broadcasting Union does not have a political mandate to act in matters of international affairs. Its members also do not set the foreign policies of their governments. So unless there is a consensus among the countries represented in the European Broadcasting Union about how to act towards a government, we're not going to see the European Broadcasting Union act unilaterally. You really need to have a broader context of international sanctions for the members of the European Broadcasting Union to come to an agreement to exclude a member.
Do you think that this edition of the Eurovision Song Contest is somehow representative of Europe's fragmented foreign policy?
Absolutely. The fact that we didn't see a decision to exclude Israel from Eurovision, despite the fact that 5 European national public service broadcasters have decided to boycott the contest, shows that there are divisions in Europe over how to respond to Israel, over how to redefine relations with Israel, and that there is still a lot of support for Israel among European governments and even among European publics. So what we're going to be looking for this year in Eurovision, certainly the biggest political issue will be how Israel fares in the voting and whether Israel manages to do as well as it has done in the past 2 years, and how this is going to be interpreted politically.
In past interviews, you've said that the Eurovision Song Contest is an influential event in Europe, a major cultural gathering that unites Europeans and is unparalleled in terms of its reach and popularity. Now, in 2026, given these developments that we've just discussed, would you say this is still the case?
This is still the biggest cultural event uniting Europeans. It's been going on for 70 years now, or at least 70 editions. There was only one edition that was cancelled, and that was in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the fact that Eurovision has been such an enduring phenomenon, that it has developed in the context of European integration, that it has always, as I said earlier, reflected political changes, but also reflected and shaped social, cultural, and technological developments, that makes Eurovision still a very powerful and influential phenomenon. This boycott is not going to change that. We have to wait and see what the ongoing legacy of the boycott is actually going to be, and how Eurovision might change in the upcoming years, considering the very turbulent period that we're finding ourselves in terms of international affairs. But I think that Eurovision is going to endure all of this just as it has endured many changes in post-war European history, many crises, many controversies. This is all part of the attraction of Eurovision as well.
And let's now leave aside the politics and focus our attention on the music and on the show. What's there to expect from this 2026 edition?
Well, first of all, let me say a lot of opera. You'll be hearing a lot of operatic influences in the entries. There's also a lot of electro pop, some folk pop, let's say, some also rock songs. So the musical genres are again very diverse in Eurovision. This year, the entries from Finland, Greece, France, and Denmark are among the top 5 that the bookies predict will win. And as I said, these are all in their national languages. And I think that's a great thing to hear. When it comes to the themes of the songs, we don't have many overtly political entries. The rules have become more stringent when it comes to the politicization of the contest, especially in the last 2 years, meaning that artists are not allowed to use Eurovision to promote political or ideological causes. Although when we look into some of the songs, we could perhaps read some political messages. The Moldovan entry speaks a lot about Europe, which is very interesting considering that Moldova is on the front line in the geopolitical battle between the European Union and Russia. Most of the songs in the end are about love. That's what Eurovision songs have mostly always been about. Love, toxic love.
Amazing. Din Vuletic, thank you very much for joining us.
And that's it for today's episode of Brussels My Love. Thank you to Shona Murray, Domi Huchtanen, and Dean Vuletic for joining us on the podcast. Before we leave, let's listen to a few words spoken by former French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman almost 76 years ago.
L'Europe ne se fera pas d'un coup, ni dans une construction d'ensemble. Elle se fera par des réalisations concrètes, créant d'abord une solidarité de fait.
For those who don't understand French, Schuman said, Europe will not be made all at once or according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievements, which first create a de facto solidarity. These words were part of the Schuman Declaration of the 9th of May 1950, with which he proposed the creation of a European coal and steel community, a crucial step for the construction of the EU. So wherever you are, happy Europe Day and thanks for tuning in. This episode was written and presented by me, Lauren Walker, and co-written with and produced by Alice Carnavali. Our editor and sound technician is Yorgos Livadidis. If you aren't already, you can listen to this series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on euronews.com or the Euronews YouTube channel. And if you like what you hear, subscribe to Brussels My Love, the podcast, leave us a review, give us a rating, and of course, spread the word. See you next time.
Euronews.